Hello, welcome to Quaker. In this episode, I want to talk about Quaker Podcasts. You might remember that a couple of months ago, I think, months, I did a video on how to find out more about Quakers and basically a long list of Quaker stuff. And I don't think I really included podcasts in that. And since I did that video, a very cool new podcast has begun. And so I kind of thought, well, this is all. And I've kind of been getting into podcasts more generally over the last couple of months. So I've noticed these things. And so I kind of thought, well, put them all together. Let's have a video of 5 Quaker podcasts that you can be getting involved in to find out more about Quakerism. So the main catalyst for this video was going to be my first Quaker podcast, and that is the Quaker Podcast. So that is the spelled Thee, fitting in with Quaker plain speech and that kind of thing. And this started a couple of months ago, so 2023, I'd say sort of around May, June sort of time. And it's an American podcast. And I think it's just been really good. I've really enjoyed listening to the episodes, and I think it's a really cool new voice in the Quaker internet world. And so I thought it was really important to do a video and also talk about some other ones as well that I've been discovering. So the Quaker podcast is actually also a 2-for-1, kind of following its history and its links. So when I was coming into Quakerism, there was a really good podcast called Quaker Faith and Podcast. And this was run by 2 American friends as well. And they covered loads of different topics. They went through the testimonies, they went through Quaker history, and, kind of what it was like to be a Quaker today kind of thing. And it was really important to me, and I found that really valuable when I was trying to find out more about Quakerism myself. And that ended a couple of years ago, and I followed them on Twitter. But then, obviously, when the show ended, that Twitter account wasn't really being used for anything until suddenly it completely changed. Changed its name to the Quaker Podcast, new images and new logos and everything. And what happened was the friends that ran the Quaker Faith and Podcast gave their handle over to the new people who are doing this new podcast. So there isn't actually any link apart from just the fact that they used their Twitter handle in order to garner some followers. And so I was thrilled. I was like, oh, great. And so I would recommend having a look at those episodes. You can find them on wherever you get podcasts. I think Spotify would have them, but I think they have a website as well, or anywhere else. I think we would have Quaker Faith and Podcast as well. I would recommend that as well. So the Quaker Podcast is run by 2 people. It's run by John Watts and Georgia Sparling. John Watts is a quite well-known internet Quaker guy. For those of you who watched my video on how to find out more about Quakerism, and I'm sure even if you haven't, quite a lot of you will know of the YouTube channel Quaker Speak. He was running that for a long time, and has since moved on to this new venture, so the Quaker Podcast. Georgia Sparling is not a Quaker, but that works out quite well. So he's obviously steeped in all of this in Quakerism, and she's discovering it. So I think that pairs off quite nicely. John is also a really good musician, so you can listen to some of his Quaker-related and non-Quaker-related music on YouTube as well. But what that does mean is that the episode is lovely to listen to. So they've got really good acoustics, and the music in there that flows in and out makes it a really nice experience. One thing that I think my favorite episode was one they did on Quakers on the internet, and I thought that was really good because, well, one, I'm a Quaker on the internet, so of course I would like it, but also I think what I liked was the way that they linked how Quakers could be using the internet today with how Quakers were using the innovative technology of their time, the pamphlet and printing, that they were at the forefront of that, and the call was kind of for Quakers to be on the forefront of new media, maybe having a look at some of the dangers of that as well. So I thought that was a really good, cool episode. And as I said, it's just a very nice acoustic experience. Like, you listen to it and it flows really nicely. They have I'll put links to all of these things, but you can become a member and support the channel as well. So I'm doing that, and I think it's just a really cool new Quaker voice, which I think is really important, especially as there are not very many of them. So the second American podcast that I've been listening to recently, and again it's also quite a new thing. So it's obviously all kicking off in internet and Quakers at the moment, and that is Quakers Today, and that is very closely linked to Friends Journal, which is the American equivalent of the Friend, so the magazine that comes out regarding Quaker stuff. And so that is also, I have to say, very nicely mixed with sound. I think they do a really good job. And basically, what they do is it's basically a digest of Friends Journal. So it might be of a month or a couple of months. I don't know. I haven't actually looked at how often they post, but basically it gives you a nice in to then, if you want to go and then read and if, any of those articles further, you can then go and follow them and read those articles on Friends Journal. So I think that's quite nice to try and get people to read Friends Journal more. So I read them from time to time. I think that they've got some really good stuff, and that's a nice in as well because don't necessarily, especially as a British friend, don't necessarily always know what's being published in the French journal. So I think it's nice to have a nice lead into that. So, but they also do this thing at the end, which I think is quite nice. It works better sometimes than others, where they pose a question at the end of each episode, and then on the following episode, they people have phoned in and left voice messages answering those questions. So these could be friends from all over the world. They're mostly American, but and you can listen to loads of different Quakers and their views on different subjects, which I think is a really nice way of kind of creating an online community kind of thing. And I was especially pleased to hear in the most recent episode of Quakers Today was that Mark Russ was on there talking about his new book, Quakers Shaped Christianity. If you haven't bought it already, please do. And that was a really nice episode. I think it was kind of sometimes it's a bit diffused as to what it's talking about. I think generally it was like the idea of Quaker rebels or Quakers talking about things that where they've had to combat against maybe um, the mainstream of Quakerism, or what might be considered mainstream. So we had a Quaker who was coming out during a quite difficult, calamitous time in their yearly meeting regarding LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community. We listened to a Quaker hunter who was talking about maybe how the problems that they've had with that whilst being part of a Quaker community. Should you be a hunter when you're a Quaker? Is that going against Quaker values or not? And then I'm guessing Mark Russ was there maybe as talking in Christian language in a Quaker community, certainly the liberal Quaker community, which I think Friends Journal is leaning more towards in an increasingly more um, universalist Quaker society. So the last of the American representatives of Quaker podcasting is Out of the Silence podcast, which also seemingly hasn't been a new episode in quite a long while, but there are quite a couple. So go back and have a listen because I think they're really good. And so these are two American Quakers again, and they're basically doing exactly what I would like to listen to. So they talk about Quaker history. They also try and do things like talking about the testimonies that they give. Each episode has each there's an episode each for the different testimonies, and they talk about more generally Christian history as well, and what Quaker worship looks like. I think that's really good for introductions to Quakerism on quite a lot of different things. Obviously, same with all of these, that they are mostly speaking to an American audience. They are Americans themselves, and so sometimes uh, there are differences between American Quakerism and British Quakerism, even in the liberal sphere. I think just in terms of some of the language, and obviously the culture is different. I mean, obviously similar in so many ways, but also different. So I would bear that in mind. But I think they're just two guys that just really like Quakerism, like talking about it, and I've really enjoyed listening to them. The episodes are, about 25 minutes, half an hour. So I think they cover quite a lot of ground, even though there aren't super many episodes. But I think it's a very convivial conversation. I think they seem really nice guys. And I think the best episode actually was their one that they did on Jesus. I think they did that really well. I mean, I think they look at the life of Jesus and why it's important for Quakerism, but they are very good at not trying to put their own views on any sort of theological element. They say where their background is, but they don't say this is what Quakers believe and stuff. They are very open, which I think we need to be. I think we need to say these are the kind of options out there, and you can fit in wherever you feel most comfortable, whenever you feel most comfortable to do so. So I think they do that really well. So over to my side of the pond then. What are the British Quaker podcasts that you can be listening to if you want to? Um, the first one that came to mind, and I was aware of it before, but to be honest, I'd watched the episodes on YouTube, but obviously they are sound, so they are podcasts, I suppose. I hadn't really twig that, but that is a Quaker Take, which is a great name. I've always loved that name. I've been a bit jealous of that name, but a Quaker Take, and so that's available on podcasting websites, and that is directly linked to both Quakers in Britain and Woodbrook. So Woodbrook being the educational body, and Quakers in Britain being the organisational body of Quakers in Britain. I think is kind of again another kind of 2-for-1 thing on Spotify at least. I'm not sure if this is the same with on other websites. I'm sure it must be, but they link a Quaker Take with Q Witness, which is kind of a different show. Q Witness is focusing a lot more on faith in action, so protesting and standing social justice and that kind of thing, and podcasting on that. Whereas a Quaker Take is literally a Quaker Take and then on different topics. So the first one that I ever watched was a Quaker Take on Christmas, for example, but there's a whole one on Quaker Take on God and things like that. So they don't shy away from the big topics at all. And they also just, as far as I'm aware, that it's not just the same presenter each time. So there's loads of different voices. So, different views on these things. And so it again just means that you get to hear a whole range of people talking on very important topics within Quakerism, especially if you're trying to find out stuff about Quakerism. You can use that to try and get, well, what is the Quaker view on marriage? What is the Quaker take on God? And it kind of goes through all those in a really nice way. And again, on the social witness side, I think that's something that's really important, something that I'm not necessarily the best at describing. So they talk about things like Stop the Arms Fair. They talk about social injustice in terms of the economy and money, and taking action on fracking and things like that. So I think that's really useful if you're interested in getting involved with faith in action. Um, I think that would be really important to listen to in terms of just trying to get an understanding of how do Quakers do that. And so my last British one is another one which sadly seems to have finished, but the episodes are still on there and they're really good. So I think this one is very interesting. And there's another one that I listened to as well as I was trying to find out more about Quakerism as well. So I think it's really important. And that is the Young Quaker podcast. Um, and so that does what it is. So it's a young Quaker who's talking about kind of the journey into Quakerism. So doing the same thing as all these other podcasts, but again, just another voice, and a British voice this time, which I think is nice. So they talk about things like a young Quaker's views on God, on Jesus, on inclusion and diversity and things like that. But I think probably the thing that has made it famous in Quaker circles is that they recorded a meeting for worship. And there's a if you want to say a controversy, there was a bit of a controversy over whether or not meetings for worship should be recorded. This was pre-pandemic, where obviously most meetings tend to have some form of virtual um, applications of being able to attend the meeting virtually. I've done a whole episode on virtual meetings for worship, um, but I think at the time, the traditional line is that you don't take photos of meetings for worship, you don't record meetings for worship, because it kind of makes it a bit of a performance. And if you're taking photos and recording, you're not participating, you're not listening, and things like that. It's something which is a bit controversial and doesn't really necessarily always have historical precedent, because there were people in earlier times in Quaker meetings that were recording what was being said. So back in the days when ministers might be ministering for an hour, there were people who were making notes of what they were saying. So there is a history of meetings for worship being recorded in some way, but obviously not with the technology that we now have. But I think it was a really cool idea, and the idea of recording a ministry for a meeting for worship to kind of show people what it might sound like. And I think what is nice in that is that it shows that meetings aren't silent in a way that you might think. There's rustling, there's people moving, there's coughing, there's all the sort of normal sounds that you would expect. I don't think there's any ministry in it, as far as I'm aware. But then again, I think that's really important as well. It's not in meeting for worship. It's not all there isn't always the ministry, and that's fine as well, because who knows what might be going underneath that in the sort of subcurrent of the meeting, which obviously can't be yet recorded in any way. But I thought that was really cool, and that was certainly an episode which got quite a lot of friends talking. So I thought certainly to include it. So there you go, 5 podcasts, some still alive, some still there, but not creating any new content for people to check out if they want to. Are there any more? Have I missed any out? If so, please let me know. I'd love to expand my own listening. I'm not sure if I have time to fit any more in at the moment. I feel like my life's being taken over by podcasts, but hey ho. If there are any more, let me know. What do you think about this? About Quaker? Do you think Quaker would work better as a podcast? Do you think it works as a YouTube channel? I'm thinking about these things. I'm also thinking, should I venture into TikTok, or is that too scary? Views would be appreciated. Let me know. But thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.